Hello there. This one is called Hospitals, or more particularly, why I like hospitals so much. For me, hospitals are about crisis, they're about opportunity, they're about suffering, and for me, ultimately, they're one of the peak experiences of being human. So what on earth do I mean about all this? Well, particularly for people who live in a country where everything that's safe, everything that's dangerous and edgy and really deeply challenging seems to have been quite deliberately minimised, to the point that a lot of the people living in this country lead quiet lives with not very much challenge. Suddenly, at a moment's notice, any one of these people can get swept up into this thing called the medical system, and it can happen without warning. And the next thing they know, they're on this roller coaster, and by and large they've lost most of their ability to control their destiny, and they find themselves in the hands of other people. I guess the reason why I like hospitals so much is because I have so much experience of them. So I have a lot of practice of being a visitor to hospitals, loads and loads and loads. So many people that I love or have loved have ended up in hospitals with a life or death crisis situation. So in the world of astrology, this is the 12th house, and I want to give a big thank and a shout out to Dan for reminding me of that fact. And also, hospitals are so much to do with the sign of the zodiac, Scorpio. And if we're talking about which planet I'm going to refer to, it's going to be the planet Pluto, which the cheeky astronomers tried to downgrade to being a planetoid. And the astronomers attempted to do that and have done that, and the astrologers are having none of it. It's still a planet as far as they're concerned. So there are so many really extraordinary opportunities presented by hospitals, and one of the approaches a person can take is they can go into total surrender. I want to big up my friend Wayne, who had a heart crisis and found himself where he was being prepared for surgery, and his beloved was very, very upset because she knew it was life or death. And he just gave her this beautiful, gentle smile, and she knew immediately he was in total 100% acceptance of the journey. They were going to operate on his aorta. And for those of you who know your biology and your medical science, you'll know that the aorta is a really significant blood vessel, perhaps the most dramatic one of all. It's huge, it's very, very powerful, and anything going wrong with this one can so easily spell the end of a life. And so I was called upon to do shamanic work for him, and I was informed of when the operation was going to take place, and I did everything that I could do, and I felt very much a connection and a sense of oneness with him when I was doing that. And would you believe it, I have an interruption. I had so hoped to prevent this from happening, and that's not possible. So I shall dive into the Ray-Ban, take out my food, continue. So that's my cue to speak about something else. So being a shaman, working for someone when they're having a life-threatening situation in hospital, very profound, very powerful. More experiences of being a visitor to hospital, and that was being there with the woman who I married, who spent a 25-year period doing this most bizarre dance with a life-threatening illness, and eventually the illness gained the upper hand. So for me, the other thing about being in the world of the hospital is it helps us to reframe reality, because for some people, for a lot of people, when someone dies, that's a failure. They chalk it up to being a failure of the system, of whatever. But my personal experience is that when someone does die in a hospital or a hospice, when we tune in very deeply, it's to remind us about the ephemerality of this existence we call life. And that is a completely sovereign free choice that some people take. It's time to go. And for some people, they go in that way of letting go of their life and moving on to the extraordinary multidimensional existence of what happens beyond this physical life, which is a whole other story. But I want to really hold for a moment with you the magnificence of that journey. So I've also been a worker in a hospital a number of times. I've been a completely untrained assistant nurse. I've been a medical scientific officer in pathology in a hospital, and I've been a medical scientific officer in microbiology in another hospital. That's part of pathology too. So I have this experience of being a worker. Oh, and I've got a fourth one I forgot about, being a student doing his BSc honours project in microbiology. On that one, I got to go sampling flower vases and sink waste traps in a very modern hospital in Wales to discover whether or not there was a bacteria lurking in said flower vases and sink waste traps, which could be life-threatening to people in what they call HDU, high dependency unit. It was called intensive care, and most people still know it as intensive care. And also when you went in the coronary care unit, because this is a fascinating thing, there's a microbe, and it was probably in this kitchen. It will cause me no problem. Anyone who comes to stay here, it will cause them no problem whatsoever. It's called Pseudomonas aeruginosa. It's got two names actually. The other name is Pseudomonas pyocyanea. It likes to have two names for whatever reason. And yet, if this same microbe is to be discovered, particularly in a sink waste trap of those two high dependency places where people are being cared for because they are in a very, very life-threatening situation, emerging from surgery or whatever, the presence of that microbe would be enough to kill them. And so I was doing research to find out whether or not it did exist in that hospital and where. And an extraordinarily large number of locations that I was measuring and investigating did indeed have that microbe. So the thing about it, it's one of the very few microbes which is very, very difficult to kill because it's resistant to almost all known antibiotics. So that's a whole other journey, isn't it? That's my fourth example of being a worker. And then of course the other one is being a patient. And I've been a patient a number of times too. And one of my most dramatic ones was when I was literally recovered by the paramedics at the scene of a road traffic accident. I'd been involved in a head-on collision. And this whole part of my body just here was really badly mashed up. And was taken away to the main hospital in Taunton. And I was put on morphine, inevitably enough. I did a soul retrieval for myself for the shock whilst I was actually on the morphine. And then not so long afterwards, I was being operated on by the surgeon, the orthopaedic surgeon. And it was an opportunity for me to have literally just overflowing gratitude and undying love for the people that work in hospitals, because there I am. If I had been in a different society, in a different time frame, I would have died, no question, really messed up. And actually, the orthopaedic surgeon did such a radically brilliant job that I have recovered, or within 12 months I've recovered 90% functionality in this part of my body, and a year or two later it's gone up to 95 or 96%. And there are certain situations, particularly strenuous yoga or qigong, where I'm just slightly aware of it, and other than that I'm not aware of it at all. And it took some really hardcore heavy work, including metal plates, collars, screws, the sort of thing that frightens some people. So that's the other thing about hospital. For a lot of people, hospital is one of the opportunities where they get really to grips with naked fear. Now, like my friend Wayne, admittedly I was on morphine, I was in a situation of it is what it is. And afterwards, when I was on the morphine afterwards, and I had a little thing I could control, a little switch I could control when to have the morphine or when not to for the first day and a half. And that was exciting, challenging, scary and deeply weird all at the same time. And I reminded myself how much I disliked that particular drug. And as soon as I was able to be off it, I was so happy. And when I was discharged from hospital, I was given a drug called Voltarol, and I took it for 24 hours, and I was supposed to take it for several days, and after 24 hours I thought, enough. So that's something else. So I really have had experience of being a patient, but I want to talk to you about, to me, the most glorious experience of being in the hospital, which is decidedly weird, I know. Picture this, I'm 6 years old and I'm in hospital and I'm going to be operated on. They're going to do 2 operations on me while they're at it. And these are what I would call operations based upon fashion. At that time it was a fashion to operate on people's respiratory system in these 2 places and to remove bits. They like to remove the bits called the tonsils in the back of the throat, and they like to remove the bits called the adenoids in the nose. And at that particular time, when children had inflammation in their respiratory systems, they would take it as a cue. Oh, let's get rid of those. It was a fashionable thing to do. So I was in hospital for that one for a week, and I was 6, and my parents left me behind, and I was in this long room surrounded by all these people in beds. And of course, everyone was children. It was a children's ward. And I had the operation, and afterwards, I remember the pain, and it was acute. And I remember the children in their beds. And it was the first time I ever saw a human being that the colour was not white. The colour was a very deep, rich chocolate brown colour. And that was like, whoa, human beings insist in more than just the colour that I am and my mum and my dad are. Wow, that was something. But mostly I became so aware of the kindness, of the humanity, of being in a group of people where all the adults there genuinely were present to be of service. They were all in service to us, the children. And so for me, it was my fundamental #1 experience of being in an intentional community. The intention is that the children arriving in the wards will be discharged and they will leave the ward alive. That was the intention. And as I've already mentioned, even if that's not the outcome, with a deeper perspective, people who do move on to the great adventure beyond this physical life, well, that's what it is. That really is a transformation. But my transformation is I had a crisis, I was frightened, and I was cared for, and I was loved. And at the end of a week, there was this movement at the end of the ward. And there were these two adults, and they pushed through the double doors. And actually, this was my worst moment in hospital because it was my parents, and I was absolutely devastated because by this time I'd been in this beautiful, wonderful, loving community environment for a whole week where the adults were always there to help us and give us nice things like jelly and ice cream after your operation. Wow, that was such a treat. I cannot tell you how much of a treat that was. So all that was over. It was back to living in the house with mother and father and being subjected to their daily dramas and coldnesses and heartlessnesses and everything that was part of my quite normal growing up period at that time in my life. They were taking me away from where I felt so at one and at peace. Ooh, that hurt. I was going to end on that one, but now I've been told to tell you about one more. And this was in my very early 20s. I waited for this operation for years because I couldn't breathe properly. And so they did some rhinoplasty, which is a fancy term. And that's the thing about hospitals and the medical profession. Give lots of fancy words to describe the simplest things. These days we call it a nose operation or a nose job. So I couldn't breathe properly. So simply what they did is they put me under the anaesthesia. Of course, that's a really transformative thing. When they count the numbers down 10, 9, 8, and it all goes a bit like a sci-fi movie, and then it all disappears and everything's gone. Ooh, that's a moment I can tell you. Experienced that a number of times now. And I'll tell you what they did. Very simple. My nose passages were too small because there was a chronic inflammation. So they got this, well, first of all, they got these bandages and they soaked them in cocaine. They stuffed them up my nose. They removed them one at a time and they got this hot wire and they just went bead, bead. Very quick and very simple operation. And they burnt my nose passages out so that I would have a bigger airway and I'd be able to breathe properly. The operation was a total success. It probably took no more than, well, it probably didn't even take half an hour to do that, frankly. And then post-operative, and there I am back in hospital, and I'm in my very early 20s. And I remember the nurses. Not only were the nurses so kind and so loving and there to be of service, just as they were when I was 6, but also the nurses were so hot. Man, they were hot. And one particular student nurse, she had a totally different uniform from all the rest. And in my little fancy world, I absolutely bonded with her and found her utterly adorable. And she had such a wonderful smile and such a beautiful, flirtatious manner. It was delicious. But I'm going to leave you on the funniest note about this particular hospital experience, because when I first went in there, and I felt a bit, as I always do in that situation, a bit intimidated by all these people, and someone asked me what my name was, and I said Keith. And actually, he didn't hear the word Keith, he heard the word Pete. So to all the patients in that ward, I was called Pete. And to all the staff in that ward, I was called Keith. Now, such a short operation, how long do you think I was in hospital for? I was probably discharged at the end of the day, wasn't I? No, I was kept in there an entire week, because that was how we rolled in those days. An entire week of being looked after, fed, and having flirtation, and having this funny game going on. All the patients call me Pete, and all the staff call me Keith. And on the last day, the student nurse came up to me and had a right go at me. We know that you've been called Pete by all the patients here, but your name is Keith. Why did you allow that to happen? Well, I didn't really have an answer at the time, but I think my answer was to be now, because it was another way to have some fun and explore and just have another experience of life. I got to be Pete for a week, and I thoroughly enjoyed that. So these are some of the reasons why I love hospitals so much. Patient, staff, visitor. And even when being a visitor is really hard going, that sense of crisis, opportunity, peak experiences. That's it for me. Hospitals represent peak experiences. So all the love to you. Thank you for coming with me on this journey. Before I go, please tell me what you reckon about hospitals. I'd love to hear from you. Tell me what you reckon in the comments about your experiences of hospitals, what you think about them and all the rest of it. Okay, bye for now.